Welcome to sleep with myth. Close your eyes and breathe like tides that never reach the shore. Tonight we drift into a sea older than time, a sea that moved but never spoke, where waves rose like ghosts and fell like forgotten dreams, leaving not a single sound behind. Before the first moon learned to shine, before stars learned to burn, there was only ocean, not blue, not dark, but hollow, a vast expanse of shifting silver, stretching beyond horizon, beyond memory, as silent as a held breath. The hollow sea did not roar. It did not whisper. It simply was. Waves rose and fell like sleeping giants, foam blooming like pale flowers, yet not even a drop dared make a sound. For this was a world without voice, a dream without echo, an ocean unborn. Deep beneath its pale surface, something stirred, not a creature, not a god, but a question, a trembling thought, floating like kelp in the current. Why am I silent? The sea had never heard itself before. It moved endlessly, shaping coastlines that didn't know they were coastline, kissing shores that didn't know they were kissed. But movement without sound is longing, and longing, if left alone, becomes ache. The hollow sea ached. In the dream of water, where light had not been invited and darkness had not been named, a single figure drifted upward from the deepest pulse, slowly like memory learning to breathe. She was not human, not divine, but the shape of sound waiting to be born. Hair like tide mist, eyes deep as drought, skin shimmering like moonlight under water no moon had ever touched. She opened her mouth, and the ocean trembled, not with voice, but with the possibility of one. Her first breath rippled across the sea like a forgotten tide returning home. Waves rose higher, as if trying to speak through her. Foam gathered in spirals around her feet like prayer. But still, nothing. Silence was law here, and law is a cage. The figure drifted across the endless waters, feeling the world beneath her like a heartbeat trapped under ice. Her thoughts were soft as low tide. If I could speak, the sea could breathe. She reached her hand into the water. The ocean pulled back, shy, like a child meeting its reflection. They were one, yet divided by silence neither had chosen. She whispered, though there was no sound to carry it, "Let me hear you." The hollow sea shivered. A wave lifted. A swell rose. For the first time in eternity, water tried to answer, failed. Yet in that failure was change, a crack in silence, invisible but real. The sea, once eternal in its quiet, dreamed a voice, and dreams are seeds, even in oceans without sound. The figure of unspoken sound drifted above the water for a long while, minutes that felt like millennia in a place where time moved without memory. She raised her hand once more, and the sea swelled beneath it, as if thousands of waves leaned in to listen to their first possible voice. The ocean's surface trembled. Foam spiraled like pale language. Ripples gathered like sentences. But no sound came. Instead, a vibration, the first heartbeat of noise. A pulse rolled across the sea like the opening of a lid no one remembered closing. Not a roar, not a whisper, but almost an unfinished word. And because it was not complete, the world shook. Beneath the glass-smooth depths, the darkness stirred. Not emptiness, something inside it. A presence that had ruled silence for an eternity, older than tides, older even than the idea of voice. It opened eyes the sea had never known it possessed. Two voids that consumed purpose. And from the deep came a thought cold and slow as crushing pressure. Do not break the quiet. The figure above the surface felt the warning like frost on the spine. Her breath caught, soundless of course, but trembling with intent. She answered with thought, not voice. The sea must speak. Darkness replied, the sea must dream. Dreaming is not speaking. The water rose higher, no longer calm but restless. Silent waves collided, each one trying to become sound. The way lightning tries to become thunder. The figure closed her eyes. She inhaled slowly and exhaled with purpose. Her lips parted, not for words, for possibility. A single droplet broke free from her fingertip, fell into the ocean, and when it touched the surface, the world heard something, not loud, not clear, but undeniably real. A tiny, trembling note, like pearl shell tapped in the dark. So brief it could have been imagined, so soft it could have been memory. But the hollow sea froze around it, stunned. For silence, when broken, becomes history. Far below, the ancient darkness recoiled, like a king awakened before his throne was ready. It rose through water thick as dream clay, vast and slow and furious. The sea churned with pressure. Fear not of sound, but of change. For if oceans learn to speak, silence can die. The figure of voice unborn lifted her chin and whispered again. A vibration, a flicker, a wound in eternity. And the sea answered, with one broken syllable, a fragile newborn sound. Ah! The first almost word to ever exist. Soft as tide foam, small as hope, but alive. And the deep darkness lunged upward, because a sound, once born, can never be unheard. From below, the deep presence rose like night given weight. Not a monster, not a god, something older than either, the keeper of quiet. It emerged from depths that had never known reflection, a shape vast enough to eclipse the sea's silver horizon. Where its body passed, light fled. Where its shadow touched, sound died unborn. But something had already changed. The droplet's note, that tiny ah, still echoed inside the waves like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Weak but alive. And nothing alive goes unquestioned. The figure of unspoken voice stood upon the water, as if silence itself held her up like glass. She watched the keeper emerge, its eyes two endless hollows, not cruel but unwilling, not evil, merely afraid. Fear is the oldest ruler. The keeper spoke without sound, thought rolling like tide beneath perception. Return to stillness. There is safety in silence. The figure answered with trembling defiance. There is meaning in voice. The sea itself shivered at the boldness of reply, because dreams rarely rebel, but once they do, they never stop. The keeper lifted its massive hand and crushed the newborn sound like a closing fist. The ocean fell silent, utterly. Waves froze mid-crest. Foam hung still in air. Time paused like breath held too long. It was as if the sea had forgotten motion entirely. The figure gasped silently, her voice unborn, her purpose threatened. But purpose fights extinction. A single ripple formed around her feet, small, fragile, but moving. Movement is defiance. The wave rolled outward, slow, shallow, alive. The keeper turned, and for the first time the deep trembled, because silence had never needed strength. Until sound existed, the figure pressed her palm to the sea, and mouthed a word she had no voice to give. Name. Water quivered like memory waking. The frozen swell cracked, and the hollow sea answered with a wounded syllable. Ha! Not full, not whole, but more than before. The keeper roared in thought, a pressure like mountains collapsing. Silence breaks. Silence dies. You would destroy eternity. The figure's eyes shone like moonlight through storm. I would give eternity meaning. She breathed again, another unvoiced prayer. The wave behind her rose, this time higher. No sound yet, but momentum, movement, becoming. The keeper lunged, not to kill, but to stop expansion, to preserve the only world it knew. Soundless battle began. Waves against stillness, ripple against abyss, becoming against being. And though the sea could not yet speak, could fight, the keeper of quiet struck first. The shadow rolled across the hollow sea, like ink poured over glass, smothering motion, swallowing ripples. Waves collapsed into stillness. Light dimmed into memory. Sound, newborn and trembling, almost died. But almost is not nothing. The figure of unspoken voice held one hand against the rising dark, and felt the sea beneath her pulse like a heart trying to wake. Weak, but willing, she whispered again, not with throat but with will. Let me hear you. The water shuddered, and answered, not syllable, not note, a cry, soft as pearl fracture, sharp as longing. Ha-lo! Half word, half breath, but enough to wound eternity. The keeper recoiled, as if struck by sunlight in a world that had never seen dawn. It wrapped the sea in silence like chains, trying to seal the crack, to smother the name before it could finish being born. The figure sank to her knees on the glass-still surface, arms trembling, lungs burning for a voice they did not yet have. She reached downward, fingers piercing the sea like memory through forgetting. Water surged upward around her arm, hungry for shape, for sound, for identity. She mouthed the final syllable. The sea screamed it, not loud, but perfect. Sea, and the world heard. There was sound, not thunderous, not endless, just one word, the sea naming itself. The hollow ocean rippled outward in shock, waves collapsing and reforming as if they had never known movement before. Foam hissed. Tides gasped. Deep currents whispered like ghosts tasting language. Silence shattered. The keeper staggered back, cracks forming through its void-dark body, as though sound were light entering stone for the first time. Its thought, once cold and absolute, trembled with something like sorrow. If silence dies, what am I? Gentle, rising like a dawn too shy to burn yet bright enough to hope. The waters hummed with silver resonance, currents weaving sound like thread through deep darkness. Half word, half melody. A prayer stitched from syllables. Waves danced. Foam swirled like breath made visible. The figure closed her eyes and let the music pass through her, as if she herself were shoreline learning to hold tide without breaking. She whispered, "Give me a name too." The sea paused, not in silence, in thought, because sound had meaning now, and meaning demanded care. It sent a wave curling around her like an embrace, and from its voice came the first true gift ocean ever spoke. Mare, a name like broken moonlight, soft as salt on skin. The keeper watched, not furious, not defeated, but changed. Stillness does not vanish. It learns new shape, and for the first time silence bowed to sound. Mare, child of voice, stood before the hollow sea newly named. She placed her palm to the water, and felt the ocean pulse beneath her hand like a great sleeping creature, finally choosing to wake. The sea spoke again, a second word, deeper, "Remember," and memory flooded the deep, not past, future. Visions spilled across the water's skin like reflections not yet born. A ship's gliding over waves that once were mute. A storm's carrying music instead of fear. Whales singing maps across continents. Children laughing in tide pools. A lover's whispering prayer into salt wine. Seas that hold stories instead of silence. The keeper bowed its head, shadow thinning to silver. Silence would remain, but no longer alone. It would be the pause between notes, the breath before speech, because sound without stillness is chaos. Stillness without sound is emptiness. Balance was born. The figure rose, hair dripping silver, eyes bright like reflected moon. She spoke, and this time sound followed. Small, simple, true. Live, the sea roared, not with fury, with birth. Waves slammed into the horizon like drums announcing creation. Currents twisted into melody. Foam patterns became syllables that washed and broke and returned. The ocean had voice, and with voice came memory. With memory came identity. With identity came change. The keeper fell to one knee, not dead, only transformed. For silence is not gone. It now exists beside sound, not instead of it. Every roar needs a hush. Every word needs breath. Balance. The ocean did not roar. It breathed. A slow exhale through waves that shimmered like moonlit eyelids, just beginning to open after centuries of sleep. The new voice of the sea wasn't thunder. It was tremor, pulse, yearning. Whispers moved across the water like foam fingers tracing a forgotten name. See, one word, small and sacred, but heavy as creation. The figure who called sound into existence stood ankle-deep in water that rippled with newborn purpose. Her voice still fragile, her body aching with a power unmastered. She waited, because names are beginnings, songs are something else. The keeper of quiet remained kneeling in the shallows, shadow leaking off its form like ink dissolving into tide. Where it touched the water, silence blossomed, soft, sorrowful, no longer absolute. It lifted its head, hollow eyes fixed upon the figure of voice. Sound scars eternity, it murmured in thought, fear still clinging to its echo. The figure answered aloud, quietly, steadily, sound remembers eternity. The keeper froze, because it had never considered memory. Silence forgets. Song preserves. If silence holds peace, song holds meaning. The first conflict of the world was no longer war, but philosophy. The sea tested its new voice again. Not a cry this time, a note. The hollow sea stands at the edge of transformation, and the first song in the history of water is ready to break the horizon. The morning that followed had no sun, only a pale glow, dawn without sound, color without heat, as if the sky waited for the sea to lead. Mare stood at the shoreline of a world not yet named, her bare feet kissed by waves that shivered with language. The keeper of quiet lingered nearby, no longer a shadow of fear, but an echo softened into gentleness. Balance held between them, like a breath between heartbeats. The sea inhaled, waves pulled back. Silence stretched, not as prison, but as promise. Then the ocean sang. It was not a melody like birds or wind. It was deeper, older, a hymn shaped from memory that had never been lived. The waves rolled forward in a rising chord, each crest carrying fragments of voice. Halosi, Mare, live, remember, words no longer broken, breath no longer unheard. The sea's new language bloomed like phosphorescent flowers across the water, shimmering phrases floating on the tides like newborn constellations. The keeper listened, not resisting, absorbing. Silence stood beside song like shadow beside flame, neither enemy nor slave. The world shifted, and the sound rippled outward, beyond the horizon, across the void, into the sleeping cosmos. Stars flared awake, as if remembering they were meant to burn. Moons regained silver. Tides rose in worship. Even the wind took voice, carrying ocean song across the unborn world like sacred scripture. Languages yet to exist stirred in the echoes. Human tongues unborn shivered like seeds beneath soil. Some would become prayer. Some would become war. Some would become poetry. All traced back to this moment, to the sea that learned to speak. Mare stepped forward into the waves, letting the water climb to her waist like warm memory. She whispered, this time with sound, "Thank you." And the ocean replied, "Sing." Not command, invitation. She inhaled like tide drawing breath, and released the first human note ever sung. It rose above the sea like a gull made of starlight, flew into the waiting sky, and broke the world open. Light flooded the horizon. Color poured across the dawn like spilled sunrise. Sound echoed over continents not yet formed. Creation found music. The keeper watched, no longer afraid. Silence remained, folded gently beneath song like undertow beneath glittering waves. Because sound is only powerful when silence listens. And silence is only sacred when song remembers. Mare turned to the keeper. "Will you stay?" Quiet answered, soft as evening tide. "I will rest inside every pause." Peace, the first harmony. See silence song. Together, the world newly born listened. And for the first time in history, the waves had a voice. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth. May the sea inside you never fall silent. End of story.